Eagle.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. And can I begin by thanking the Minister for his statement and for early sight of it? Mr Deputy Speaker, defence procurement matters. It provides the vital kit that our forces need to fight, as well as supporting hundreds of thousands of UK jobs. We need to get this right as a nation for both our national security and for economic growth. But, Mr Deputy Speaker, defence procurement is a mess. It needs deep and major reform. The Public Accounts Committee describes it as broken and repeatedly wasting taxpayers' money. And it's been a mess for the last 14 years. Since 2010, the Conservatives have wasted £15 billion of taxpayers' money through mismanagement of defence procurement programmes. £5 billion has been wasted in this Parliament alone. And with 46 out of 52 major projects not on time or not on budget, this government are failing British forces and failing British taxpayers. It's as a government that time and again has been criticised for poor performance on defence procurement. There have been 17 National Audit Office reports on procurement in the MOD since 2019, 4 reports by the Defence Select Committee and 8 reports by the Public Accounts Committee, and they've all been critical, some highly critical, of the government. So it's right that the Minister is proposing some changes, and we welcome the fact that he's proposing changes. He mentioned Ajax. Can the Minister explain how his proposals would have stopped the disasters of the Ajax procurement? That was supposed to see vehicles in service in 2017, but they will not now go on operational deployment until 2026. And over £4 billion has been spent and just 44 vehicles delivered to date. That's 70% of the budget spent for 7% of the vehicles ordered. That cannot be described, Mr Deputy Speaker, as good value for money. Now, the MOD's command paper refresh, which sets out his policy for acquisition reform, doesn't even mention tackling waste, and it doesn't mention value for money. So, Mr Deputy Speaker, how would these changes that he's proposed stop what happened to the E7 Wedgetail procurement? This programme, vital to enabling the UK to meet our NATO commitments, was cut from 5 planes to 3 by a ministerial decision to save money. But the changes have meant that the RAF gets only 60% of the capability it wants, whilst paying 90% of the original price. He mentioned Morpheus. How would his proposal stop cost overruns, such as occurred in the Morpheus communications system procurement? This £395 million contract, awarded in 2017, was cancelled just before Christmas, having delivered nothing at a cost of £690 million. It leaves the ageing Bowman having to be used for another decade by our forces in the field. And as he said in his statement, he's just announced the invitation to negotiate on the new medium helicopter. It's taken him since September 2022, when this announcement was first expected, and 3 subsequent delays to get the announcement finally made. So why has it taken so long? And how will his integrated procurement model prevent delay after delay to expected invitations to negotiate happening in future? He expects the contract to be signed in 2025. Does it really take 3 years to invite negotiations and write contract specifications? And will his new integrated procurement model speed this up, or will it slow things down at the front end? How does his announcement today tackle the waste, poor value for money and delays that appear endemic in the current MOD procurement system? He says the new integrated procurement model will be implemented this year in respect of new procurements. But when does he actually expect to see better value, faster, less wasteful procurements actually happening? He talks about procurement being anchored in pan-defence affordability, but his 10-year equipment plan is already £17 billion over budget. So what adjustments are going to be made there? Mr Deputy Speaker, the long-standing failures on procurement in the MOD matter in an increasingly dangerous world. They send a message, just as the signals sent to our adversaries over the last 14 years by the current government hollowing out our armed forces, creating a recruitment crisis and shrinking the army to its smallest size since the Napoleonic era send a message. Labour believes that defence procurement can strengthen UK sovereignty, security and economic growth. Defence procurement reform will be a top priority for a Labour government to ensure that our troops have the kit they need to fight and to fulfil their NATO obligations.
Very good. Very good.
Thank you. Well, I am grateful to the Honourable Lady for her comments. I would say, first of all, I actually think that there are some issues here that are above party politics and playing politics, if I'm honest, especially when we look at the threat we face and the need for us to have more competitive military procurement. But she is aware that for all that she said, we have seen a one-year reduction in procurement time from December 2020 to December 22. Extraordinary efforts in DNS in particular to get equipment into Ukraine, and I think we should never underestimate that. The way we've both gifted our own stocks and scoured the world to find an enormous amount of munitions, not least 300,000 artillery shells. That is very positive procurement and in the hour of need as far as Ukraine is concerned. But she asked a perfectly fair question. Obviously, we cannot say how any of these measures would have worked in the past, but to take some of those hypothetical questions, for example, how would this have helped in respect of Ajax, which I think is the key one given the Sheldon report? And as I say, I can only speculate. But if I take, for example, the emphasis on exportability, this will be robust and from the start of programmes. If you were required to look at that, I do think that puts more pressure where requirements are overly exquisite, because of course that will balance out against the international demand. The reason we want to promote exportability is to ultimately strengthen the resilience of our industrial base. Our market is not big enough. If we have that check in place, I think it will reduce that tendency towards the exquisite. Secondly, we will have this new setup in terms of the advice we receive at the beginning about this expert advice, the second opinion as I call it, particularly scientists at DSTL, export experts at DBT, and our own civil servants on finance and so on. Very clear advice, which again would look at some of the issues, the technical issues around potential platforms. At the moment, to be frank, and I appreciate it's only possible to say from internal knowledge, but you don't get that level of, shall we say, balance against and challenge, frankly, against the primary requirement coming forward from the frontline command. If we take the example, how would it have applied with NMH? Well, the Honourable Lady asked, will this add time at the beginning? And what I would say, I can't comment on the specifics of NMH because it's commercially sensitive, but talking in generality, I would trade more time at the beginning, thrashing out the big issues, working out and locking down the policy on, for example, industrial production, so that these issues don't find themselves being reopened later in time. Of course, I'm talking generically, I'm not on specific programmes. But the issue is, if you don't lock these things down, there is a real habit for them to come back later and to create the biggest delay you could experience when the programme gets put in question. So I do think that's crucial. Finally, she asked about the affordability issue and the equipment plan. I think this is the most important part. I spoke about the munitions plan, the munitions strategy. We could simply say, will the single services come forward with their priorities in terms of new munitions? Whereas I think the best way to do this and how we are doing it is to look robustly at the threat we face. That is the most important issue, to work back from that and then prioritise at a pan-defence level what the most urgent requirements are in terms of new munitions. I think many people would think that's common sense, but that's not necessarily the way that the system has worked. So let me finish by saying, Mr. Deputy Speaker, in response, perhaps the most positive experience I've had as Defence Procurement Minister was visiting one of our drone SMEs who were bringing forward a drone that we were using in Ukraine. They were receiving data from the front line and spirally developing that platform within days to go back into service so it was competitive against the threat they were facing based on the data. I want to create a constant loop between industry and the MOD, where we're sharing data, where we're sharing frontline knowledge, so that we have a far more rapid period of technological innovation. I think when you look at that, the equipment plan, this very static look over 10 years, will look like an old-fashioned way of looking at things. The priority is to get technology into the hands of the military. That will increasingly be on the software basis, and that is how we strengthen our armed forces overall.
Chair of the Defence Select Committee, Sir Jeremy Quinn.